What's up, my waffle eaters? It's Dev from Mtg, aka the Maverick Marshmallow. I got Ziggy with me, just barely. Can you see his little chinny? Yeah, his little chin's down there. He's so cute, flicking his ear. But anyway, it's probably enough of that. If you can't tell, I'm in a really good mood today. I'm stoked to finally talk about a deck that I've been jonesing for a couple of months now. At least, probably more than that actually. We haven't talked about a discard deck since at least War of the Spark came out, which is crazy because I think that it's actually in a better position now than it's been in a very long time in Standard. It's probably time to finally start taking this deck seriously. And it crushed the Patreon poll this time around, so I think that more people are aware now than ever that discard is actually a very real deck, and we need to analyze it seriously before we just write it off entirely. So today I finally get my fix for discard. So just let me gather my thoughts for a minute and y'all enjoy some thick booty beats. I'll see you on the other side of the intro.
Yo, I'm sorting through some heinous haters like a pooper scooper. I'm just trying to take my life like a Koopa Trooper. I'm Double Mario, that mean I'm super. And I'm freaking dangerous like a Chupa Cabre. Got them all day like a Kanye, but I'm way better getting cheddar in Monterey. But Jack, you don't know, man. You got the show, man. You want roast beef? Well, I'm Arby's.
And we're back. Now, I've just said that we haven't talked about this deck since War of the Spark. And the whole reason that we talked about the deck when War of the Spark came out is because Davriel was in that set. And it just seems awesome. I mean, it's no the rack. It's no this card. Where'd you go? There you are, buddy. Oh, no. This card, right here, the rack. I finally retrieved it from behind the couch. But this is one of the best discard payoffs of all time. So I don't necessarily expect Davriel to be the rack. But that said, this does work in historically a lot of the same ways that the rack worked. In that there's this tendency to look back at old school discard decks and look at them as control decks, but that's far from the truth. Many discard decks that played cards like the Rack and Hymn to Torak even would very often function as effectively aggro decks. They'd play a bunch of 2-drop black creatures like Knight of Stromgold out of Ice Age or Order of the Ebon Hand out of Fallen Empires and end up just playing like aggro decks. And then, once the opponent starts to turn the corner or you get your board wiped or whatever, well, that's when the Rack comes to the rescue and provides this ridiculous reach piece for your aggro deck. And that's kind of exactly how we're using Davriel in this deck. This will very rarely deal all 20 points of damage to your opponent, but what it will do is the last 4 or 6 points of damage you need to finish a game off. Now, all that said, the first creature that I want to show you in this deck is Rankle, Master of Pranks. And if you're into mathematics, you may notice that this is not below Davriel on the curve, but it's nonetheless the most important creature in the entire deck. And it does a whole bunch of stuff. It works with Davriel really nicely. You get in for 3 damage, and then you force them to draw a card. You get to draw a card too, but that's like dealing 4 damage to them, because they also lose life. And then, with Davriel, you can just make them discard the card they just drew. It's a really good interaction that'll come up in a whole bunch of games. If they're both on the board at the same time, you can do 5, sometimes 6 damage per turn cycle to your opponent, and your opponent really can't handle that for too long. 3 turns of that, and they're just dead. So this is just absolutely one of the best cards that a discard deck could ever even hope that Wizards would print. So let's play all 4 of them. Now, one of the best ways of holding on to your Rankle or your Davriel once you do play them is by making sure that you deprive your opponent of resources in the earlier turns before you ever even cast your big cards. So that said, we're going to play 4 copies of Yarok's Fenlurker and 3 copies of Burglar Rat here. Now, I only went with 3 copies of Rat because I really don't think we need 8 2-drops that do this, and Yarok's Fenlurker is just heads and shoulders above it, and sometimes you'll even pump it, but not very often. That said, you do have the ability to do that. But again, I didn't think that we needed 8 of this effect, but 7, yes, I'll take 7. But believe it or not, we have to play a bunch of even smaller creatures than those 2-drops because I want to be able to make sure that we can enable the absolute best discard spell in all of Standard, hands down, except for maybe Thought Erasure. There's definitely an argument. But anyway, I really want to play Drill Bit and play it on turn 2 as often as possible. So that said, I'm also going to play 4 copies of Foulmire Knight and 4 copies of Vampire of the Dire Moon. Now, I spent a good little chunk of time earlier in the video arguing for small creatures in this deck, but the real reason we need to play small creatures is Drill Bit. We need cards that reliably deal damage as early as turn 2 in this deck, and I ended up on these despite all the things that the commenters are saying. at this moment, as we speak, a bunch of people are asking why Cat Food Combo isn't just in this deck, because Cauldron Familiar could do this on turn 2. Why isn't Vicious Rumors in the deck? I think that speaks for itself, but we'll talk about those cards a little bit later on in the video. For now, just let you know that I ended up on these for a couple of key reasons. One being that all the small creatures our opponents are playing right now tend to be things like Edgewall Innkeeper or Gilded Goose that they will not block with. I can almost guarantee you, your opponent's not blocking with that turn 1 Edgewall Innkeeper. You will be able to proc your drill bid. But in any case, they also translate into really good cards in the late game. Cat Food Combo does too, but I'm not sure that we can actually fit Witch's Oven in this deck. There's your explanation for that. But like a card like Vicious Rumors, for instance, terrible in the late games. I just didn't want to top deck Vicious Rumors. I don't mind so much top decking a Falmar Knight because we can draw a card, get a Death Toucher. Even Vampire of the Dire Moon isn't a terrible top deck because these will translate into really sweet defensive pieces in the late game that hold back things like Lovestruck Beast or Gruul Spellbreaker or Rotting Regisaur or any number of huge creatures not named Questing Beasts, because these can't block Questing Beasts, but pretty much every other ground creature in this format. These things have awesome game against and allow you to just like keep doing reliable damage with your Davriel every turn. These are really, really good in this deck. But don't worry, those little guys aren't the only removal that we're playing in the deck. We've also got 4 copies of Murderous Rider, who I probably don't even have to really explain, but I will say that discard decks often go through like 2 phases of gameplay. First, there's the first few turns of the game where you're just like picking apart your opponent's hand. And then there's the point of the game where your discard spells become a lot less relevant as your opponent enters top deck mode, and then they just get to play whatever they drew. That's usually why discard decks are ineffective, if they're ineffective. Well, Murderous Rider, to the rescue. This not only takes out stuff that your opponent happened to manage to top deck the same turn they play it before they even say go. That's really, really sweet. But it also translates into a 2/3 lifelinker. That's going to deal a few damage some of the time, block smaller creatures, take them out or whatever, but more importantly, going to gain you some life back over the course of a couple of turns. Not only does Murderous Rider itself drain you some life, but Rankle can drain the life from you. Drawing a card off Falmar Knight drains some life from you. We've got a land in the deck that hurts us when we activate it, so there are plenty of ways that we're hurting ourselves in this deck, not to mention any damage our opponent's doing to us. So these lifelink creatures can prove really, really relevant a lot of the time in the mid to late game for that reason alone. Speaking of big lifelink creatures that are really important once the game starts going late, 3 copies of Cavalier of Night. It was 2 in the first place, but 3. I think 3 is where you want to be. The card is just nuts, and we've got plenty of small creatures that won't be anywhere near as relevant on turn 5 as they were on turn 1 or 2. Like once you play Burglar Rat or even Yarick's Finlurker, I don't care that it can pump. Even when you play that card, it kind of doesn't matter so much anymore after you get the initial ETB trigger on it. So this will actually give you something to do with those little 1/1s and stuff. Even the Death Touch guys that aren't really pulling their weight anymore can easily be sacrificed to a Cavalier of Night. That's a great way to turn the corner. Just kill their most important creature and suddenly you got 4/5 lifelink, bro. Like, I don't know. It's really hard for a lot of decks to answer that. And I've had plenty of people just scoop to Cavalier of Night. Because once you have a 4/5 lifelink in play, it really kind of doesn't matter if you're at 6. You're going to go right back up to 10 as soon as they swing in. So it's just a really, really awkward card to swing into. It's a hard card to block for that matter, especially considering it usually kills a creature that would be able to block it when it enters the battlefield. So it's just a really crazy finisher that also catches us back up on life, and it's just one of the best ways imaginable to turn the corner. Yes, play this card. And probably most importantly, there's also the fact that when you play it, you get to be like, this is the Cavalier of Night. Oh no, you get to do that. So, yes, play all 3 copies of this. But there's also a few copies of Liliana in the deck. She's the Dreadhorde General. So we're going to play a couple of copies here because this is just the absolute best way to grind out a game in this entire color. I was going to say color combination out of habit, but it's not. It's just one color. It's Creature Factory, draws cards in a roundabout way. We want both of those things, but it also takes care of like loose ends that have hit the board that we weren't able to force our opponent to discard. Just Liliana cost a lot of mana and a lot of money, but you kind of have to play the card if you want to make this deck as competitive as possible. Now here's every single land in the deck in one nifty graphic right here. We're not playing too many of them, right? Just 20 Swamp, a Witch's Cottage, but only 1 Witch's Cottage, and then 4 Castle Locthwain. Play all 4 Castle Locthwain. It's a very important card, but again, I think you should only play the 1 Witch's Cottage. This is mostly a personal preference of mine, but in a deck that's this aggro, we're trying to play 1-drops, trying to play 2-drops every single game. I just absolutely hate having Witch's Cottage in my opener, so I'm only down to 1 copy of it, but I do still want it in the deck because it can make big plays with Rankle and Cavalier of Night sometimes. Now here's our sideboard right here. Starting off with 4 copies of Duress seems self-explanatory, but I will say Duress is a little bit weaker than it usually is because so many of the good quote-unquote spells in this format are actually just creatures that have adventures, and Duress can't hit them, so keep that in mind. But this is a discard deck. Duress is still a very good sideboard card. Takes out Planeswalkers, removal, all that stuff. Play all 4. 2 copies of Legion's End. I just think it's the best 2-mana removal piece Black has access to right now. You might find a room for a copy or 2 of this in the main deck even, but definitely put it in post-sideboard. This is great against aggro decks that play a bunch of small creatures. You can't force them to discard, and it'll even occasionally force them to effectively discard some creatures. So yeah, to Legion's End. There's also 2 Witch's Vengeance in the deck, which could be 2 Cry the Carnarian, but Cry is going to take out, like, all of our guys, like, all the time. So, I ended up not playing Cry, and instead, I'm on Vengeance. This can take out, like, 3 or 4 Knights some of the time, or like 2 or 3 Mana Dorks, 2 of the 2 Risen Reefs or something, a couple of different elementals. There's all kinds of stuff that Witch's Vengeance can do. And even though we might like lose a Foulmire Knight if we name Knights, they're still going to lose 3 or 4 of their guys, so I really don't care. Vengeance is a much better spell than people give it credit for. There's also a couple of copies of Massacre Girl. I nailed her name first time. I'm famously bad at saying it, but this will kill like all of our creatures, usually, but I kind of don't care, because it also kills all the opponent's creatures and leaves a 4/4 behind. I'll just end the game by itself. A great deal of the time. So a couple of copies of the Massacre Girl in there. And then a copy of Command the Dreadhorde, which you also probably don't necessarily have to play. But I'm playing a copy just because it's really cheeky. You're up against a mid-range opponent with a lot of planeswalkers or big creatures or whatever. Well, pretty easy to turn the game around very quickly. And just get, 1 or 2 big cards out of their graveyard, go down to like 2 or 3 life, but you don't care. You've just completely locked them out of the game by using their best cards against them. And we've got all the discard in the world to put cards in their graveyard for us, not to mention a few important removal spells that can put important permanents there too. So by the end of the game, you get to turn 7, 8, 9. Command the Dreadhorde can just come down and nab, again, like the 2 most important things in graveyards and just win the game for you outright. A card that could be in the main deck, but if you're going to play some 6-drops, I think Liliana is probably the better choice. But this does fit with the discard theme more, so I wanted at least 1 copy of it in there. And against decks where the game is going to go long enough for you to easily resolve this card, it's a great card to cast. Well, here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 65, not too shabby for a deck that's below $150 right now. I don't think it's far below. I think it's like $135 to play this deck, that's pretty good, honestly, for what this deck actually is. Now, I could see you asking, why wouldn't I just play actual mono black with Iara? Why wouldn't I just play that like mono black aggro deck that uses the cat food combo and all that? Well, you could if you wanted to, but this is a deck for people who really like to make their opponent discard stuff. It's a very popular mode of playing Magic for the last like 25 years. You got your discard fanatics out there, I know, because I'm one of them. And honestly, if you're one of them too, this deck is for you. Like, discard is in a much healthier place than it's been in Standard in years and years and years. Not only do we have things like Davriel and Rankle, which make our opponent discard cards every single turn if we want them to. Well, we've got these incredible late game finishers like Cavalier of Night. We've got Liliana, plus an amazing discard piece like Drill Bit, which might not be Thoughtseize, but it's like the closest we're going to get pretty much in this Standard. So like, discard is in a pretty good place right now, especially in a format. There's a fair amount of mid-range decks, we can just rip their important cards out of their hand before they ever get a chance to play them in the first place. You're excited to play that 5-drop that's not going to get turned into an elk anymore. What if you don't get to play it at all? Isn't that more annoying? So, discard is actually, I think, in a fairly healthy place. Take it seriously, try the deck out, and tell me that you're not having fun. Now, I do have a game that I want to show you in this video, and it's only 1 this time around. It's usually 2, I know, but this deck does tend to take very long games. I can only really find time for 1 in the runtime of this video. Now, we start on a mulligan here, but we've got a pretty good hand otherwise. We're able to actually get Drill Bit on turn 2. This is what I was talking about earlier. They're not going to block with the 1/1 token. They want to make sure that they have a 1/1 so that Lovestruck Beast can actually attack when it comes down. So we get a free Drill Bit here. We're able to get rid of the Trail of Crumbs in their hand, a play that I'm sure they really wanted on turn 2, and we're able to get the information on what's in the rest of their hand. We're able to Yarrick's Finlurker on turn 2, get a forest out of their hand, a very important resource. They need to play the game of Magic, and get in a consequence-free attack with Foulmire Knight. Now, they're going to be able to Lovestruck Beast on this turn, but not a big deal. We draw into Drill Bit, which allows us to Swift End this Lovestruck Beast and Drill Bit on the same turn to get the Once and Future out of their hand to make sure that they're not able to get anything out of the graveyard that we've been able to put there so far this game. Now, at this point, we trade a couple of small blows. They Beanstalk Giant, attack, say go. We just drop a land and then attack and say go, but very soon, our opponent is going to start really opening up with some very explosive turns and start turning the corner on us. One of the reasons I wanted to show off this game is because I think it's very indicative of the ways that this deck can withstand and turn the corner itself to grind games out, because we will be forced to do that in this game. Our opponent has a good turn there, casting both Trail of Crumbs and Lucky Clover, really setting themselves up. We get an attack step in and then Cavalier of Night to get rid of this token, hopefully making sure they're not able to attack with any Lovestruck Beast they draw. Instead, they draw an Edgewall Innkeeper, so we probably should have held off on that Cavalier of Night. That said, we don't get punished too much. Our opponent does have a great turn, though, here, not only getting Innkeeper, but also getting a Flaxen Intruder, a Rosethorn Acolyte, and a Gilded Goose. They drew a bunch of cards, and they really expanded their board state that turn, so we gave them a nice. Now, this turn, we're going to attack with Cavalier of Night, make them lose a creature, gain a little bit of life back, go to 18, and we'll waffle back and forth on playing this Fenlurker. But in the end we do. I wanted a body on the battlefield, but I also wanted enough mana left over to activate Castle Locthwain, so I didn't go Murderous Rider on that turn. Now on this turn, they're able to break out a little bit more, get some card advantage from Trail of Crumbs. And not only that, but they're also able to cast this first Beanstalk Giant. You heard me right, the first Beanstalk Giant. There will be more before this game is all over, but that's when you see we are able to activate Castle Locthwain and get this Liliana. Liliana's probably going to end up doing the most work for us in this game, is ultimately what's going to win us this game. We get a token out of it this turn. And notice, by the way, another thing that I mentioned with Foulmire Knight earlier is that it's really good at holding off big creatures, like, for instance, this Beanstalk Giant right here. It's not going to be able to do much this turn because it doesn't want to get traded for a 1-mana creature. So again, just these little Death Touch guys can really help hold off big board states from your opponent. But that said, the opponent is doing a lot this turn, getting another Lucky Clover, a trigger off of Trail of Crumbs, but we just go with another token off Liliana, Burglar Rat, a card they drew from Edgewall Innkeeper out of their hand, and play this Murderous Rider to expand our board state. Now we're in a bona fide war of attrition, which we will almost certainly win. They're going to get the other Beanstalk Giant at this point, and a bunch of lands too, because of their double Lucky Clovers, and just make two 11/11 Beanstalk Giants and draw a card off of Edgewall Innkeeper. But again, even though they have this ridiculous board position right now, they are going to make a mistake and try to swing into Liliana to get rid of it. At which point we can just block and end up drawing a bunch of cards and putting the game out of reach, especially considering that we will very soon be able to ultimate the Liliana. So after we get past this attack step, you'll note that the opponent very quickly scoops the game up, especially when they notice that we draw all of these cards and put the Murderous Rider back into our library. But this is exactly the kind of game that I wanted to showcase, because even if they hadn't have made the mistake of getting their attack step in there, we still would have won this game, especially after drawing the second Cavalier of Night. But that's pretty much it for this one. Sorry I only did one game this time around, but this deck plays very long games for the most part. And so there was just no way I was going to get like a 3-minute game in there for you. But anyway, I hope that the one game was enough to sort of prove to you what the deck is trying to do. So I do think that's very illustrative of the typical game for this deck for the most part, and how resilient the deck can be and all that. So again, if you're interested in it, I hope you are. Hope I made a good enough case for it. Just click the first link in the description. Go over to TCG Player. Pick up any pieces that you need at the lowest prices on the entire information superhighway. And while you're at it, make sure you like the video and subscribe if you haven't done that yet. It'd be nice if you actually knew when I uploaded videos, and I'm pretty sure that YouTube has stopped putting me in recommended feeds. for people I'm not subscribed to. So make sure you subscribe to make sure my channel doesn't die. So that would be really sweet of you. If you haven't done it yet, make sure you sub. And again, if you got the Skrill for it, check out the Patreon so you can vote on what decks we even do in the first place around here and really help you dude out so that we don't have to turn off the lights on this operation. It's getting pretty serious. But anyway, I think that's pretty much it for this one, aside from the Patreon shout out to Keel Rudnitsky. Nice to see you. I hope I really didn't butcher your name, as I so often do with patrons. I ought to contact people and ask them, how do you pronounce your name? But that seems patronizing, right? That doesn't seem right, but still, Keel Rudnitsky, you've been a patron for a really long time. There's like an executive producer or something on The Masked Singer whose last name is Rudnitsky, and I've always wondered, like, are they related to you? So let me know at some point. But anyway, I'm just glad that you're a patron and have been for a really long time. Hope you're still enjoying the content. So anyway, just wanted to say your name so you know I appreciate you. I guess I'm actually done for this one. So I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind. And yes, Ziggy's still down here. You can barely see his tummy because his tummy's really hot. Oh, he loves the rubbins. He loves the tummy rubbins. Look at the bub. Look at the bub getting the rub. Oh, rub a bub. Man, the camera really does not want to move. Yeah, you can't even see his face. You can't even see his little face. Where's the bub? Where's the patrons? There they are. While you look at the bub. I can't even barely capture you in the camera. That's how big you are. Like that. That means you're technically bigger than me. I fit in the camera frame really easily. How are you the biggest living organism that ever was on the planet? Man, you're bigger than a cat should be. I know that much. Look at you. Look at your wingspan. Lord. Huh. Have a good day, everybody.